I'm really excited to go through some aspects of data management and the data management tool. As we close out this year, it is a requirement for most, if not all, funding agencies. And so I am excited to kind of share some of this information and see what questions you have. Real quick, hi. I'm Samantha Harmon. I am the data services librarian and a assistant professor through the libraries. And so I'm kind of the person you would go to for anything related to data management plans, any grant requirements as they relate to data, navigating various repositories like Open Science Framework, finding or assessing credible data sets. So that can be for you as a researcher, but also for any of your students or department faculty staff who need assistance. And then I also provide instruction or workshops on things like data management, data ethics, data literacy, and now AI literacy. Um, and so for today, I really want to start with the big picture. So, what is a data management plan? Why does it matter? I want us to think through a few key data management concepts and finish with practical walkthroughs of the data management tool. So, by the end of this, my goal is that you'll feel more confident in creating your own plan and understanding how it supports your long-term research goals. So, I really like to frame that data management and the data management tool are two topics that go hand in hand, but on their own, they could take multiple lectures, sessions, workshops to fully cover. The current slide deck that we're going through right now, I would use if I was going to cover these topics into 90-minute sessions. So, what's going to most likely happen is we may jump around as this is only an hour session, and I want to save time for any questions you might have. My goal is to hit on the most essential topics. All of my workshop materials will be uploaded into OSF by the end of this year, and I can share any links to this slide deck for you to review more in depth. So, with that, I really want us to step back and think about data. So, at its core, data is just information. And I say this because oftentimes we're asked in our data management plan for things that we don't typically see as data. So, it's very versatile and it can be used as evidence to back up an argument. In your research context, this is going to be any information collected, recorded, or generated during your research. So, faculty are often surprised that NSF expects code, scripts, and workflows to be addressed in their DMP. This is especially important in computational, engineering, and social science work that will involve things like code books and processing steps. The key that you really want to think about is reproducibility. If data relies on a model or a script to be meaningful, NSF wants those elements to be documented and archived as well. So we're going to go into more detail, and I'll provide some more salient examples later in the slides when we start to walk through the DMP tool. So, data management refers to how we collect, organize, store, and preserve our research over time. So, it's really a set of practices across the research lifecycle that ensures compliance for grant requirements, research integrity, and reproducibility. In the short term, it's about streamlining your research process and reducing some of the friction that we might see. So, whether you're trying to find files when you need them, so you'll think of like naming conventions there, and folder hygiene, keeping things consistent. So, those will be some of your naming conventions, and collaboration more smooth, or it happens more smoothly. If we're thinking long term, it's about ensuring your work is reusable, understandable, and properly attributed. So, this is becoming increasingly important for things like compliance, transparency, and future reuse. I think we have enough time for me to show this short. video that a lot of people technology. So this is just a funny little video that goes over some of the data management things that can happen.
At least for me, I'm not hearing the audio of the video.
Oh, good. Goody. Um,
Same here.
let's me not waste our time. I'm actually let I'm gonna skip this video. And instead, I will send you a link for this. And the only reason I'm skipping is I really do want to make sure that we have enough time. A lot of the things in this video is going to cover what researchers experience on a day-to-day basis. So those are things like trying to collaborate with somebody who only has one copy of the file, particularly data. Um, Having it on only one storage option. So on this, you'll see that the data is on a flash drive, right? There's a lot of things that could go wrong with that. The flash drive is actually mailed in this video, and so that leaves room for during the mailing process for that hard copy to be destroyed. And if you have no backups and that data is just gone, interoperability, so the inability for data to be used across very different formats. So I'm going to cover a lot of these data management practices. This video is a really good way if you're looking for a more humorous way to kind of see what are some of the data management pitfalls, as well as if you're talking to any of your students and you want to show this. But I'm really going to take us and looking at these data management practices as they relate to your DMP. And so I'm not going to have us go through these like they are in group assignments. I just wanted to share them since you will have access to the slides, that this is kind of a a think through assignment you could use. So each example is going to describe a project, right? So example one really explains a collaboration studying the environmental impacts. And it starts to describe how the field data is logged, how it's stored, and what this is supposed to prompt your thinking for is thinking through what went wrong. So here you'll see that we ran into some problems with storage, there weren't clear procedures. You'll think through how to prevent it and how to fix it now. So I've made these pretty tailored to something that you would see in your grant process. So there are three different types of examples, really covering things like storage, spreadsheet hygiene, and file naming conventions. So I really like to see data management as the backbone of the research process. So it's really about staying organized, ensuring that your data is accessible and making it reusable. Really not just for you collecting it, but for anyone who might work with it later. A lot of the times when I'm talking to some grad students, I'll say, your advisor might want a student 5 years from now to pick up your project and expand on it based off of where you left it off. Do you have everything in place that somebody could come behind you and do that? So that's what you're really thinking about for your DMP. You don't know when somebody's going to want to take your data, take your research, and expand on it. So your goal with this data management plan is to make sure somebody could come up and take your research right where it started, reproduce your research. Um, and so your DMP is really a short document, 1 to 2 pages. For NSF, for example, it can't be over 2 pages, that describes how you'll manage your data both during and after your project. So it's going to cover things like data formats, storage, documentation, and long-term sharing or preservation. I really like to see these as a roadmap and a record. So it helps you plan ahead, but it also serves as this reference point for others or future you. And so I want to reiterate that I'm thinking really big picture right now. I'm explaining data, what data management plans are, and then we're going to go through the DMP tool and I'll start to provide more context of like what data looks like, what different storage options are, what documentation and long-term sharing or preservation looks like. So when you're thinking of your DMP as your research roadmap, you'll want to think through a few questions like, what kind of data will you generate? Will it be text files, images, spreadsheets? How big will it be? How will you organize and store it? What's your folder structure? How will you name your files so they don't turn into um, final version 2 underscore really underscore your initials or maybe your excuse me your co-PI's initials. You want to think through who's responsible, who on your team is going to keep things organized. And so I won't go through all of these, but here's the thing. Your data management plan isn't just going to be a document. Um, it's really a living part of your research. And again, the DMP tool serves you really well here because it walks you step by step through every aspect that's needed to answer some of these questions. So if we think about just project management, we usually picture a pretty straightforward path. So you plan a study, you propose it, you get funding, you conduct the research, analyze the results, and publish. That's the traditional top-down approach, shown in this orange um, circle. But good data management isn't just a box that you check off at the end. It's actually woven into your research process at every stage. So that's what this blue pathway or the blue circles represent. This is your data management workflow, and you'll see it's running in parallel to your project. So when you begin to incorporate all of these data management practices into your work, it's going to allow your research to be fair. So this is going to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So this is going to mean that your research data will not only be more visible for others to use, but it's also going to lead to smoother integration with other data and become more easily reusable for new research. It's also important to think about the care principles. So this is your collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. These principles really emphasize the ethical aspects of data management, particularly if you're working with Indigenous data or data that involves vulnerable populations. So when you are able to incorporate both FAIR and CARE principles into your work, this means that your research will not only be more efficient and reusable, but also ethically sound and socially responsible. NSF is moving towards a more structured, FAIR-oriented data policies, and I anticipate future solicitations to require more standardizations that fall under these. So when you're going through and you're working through your DMP, they're going to look for, so by there I mean your reviewers, for feasibility and clarity in the data management plan. A strong data management will include clear workflows. You will name who is responsible for what and show that the team understands the community standards. NSF wants to see that you're using appropriate repositories, documenting your data, and planning for long-term access. And increasingly, they expect fair aligned practices. So that's things like persistent identifiers, open formats, and metadata or adhering to metadata standards. And I wanted to show you a few things reviewers repeatedly flag or things that I see when I'm reviewing data management plans. You really want or you want to avoid a data management plan that is vague or aspirational. So, stating that data will be shared upon publication, for instance, it's not going to be enough information. You're going to name where, how, and what format. Another big issue is forgetting that code and computational workflows are considered data under NSF's updated definitions. Also, think through that storage is not preservation. NSF is going to expect that you have a real archiving plan. More and more, we're seeing that NSF reviewers are reading the DMPs more closely. They're going to check whether what you say in the research plan aligns with your DMP. If your narrative says that you'll produce 5, I don't know, terabytes of video data, but then your DMP says that you'll store everything on a laptop, that's going to become a red flag. So the DMP is really this meaningful part of the evaluation, and it shouldn't be an afterthought. So with that, I thought it might be helpful to walk through the data management tool. And throughout this, I'm going to stop through the various parts of writing your plan and provide more explanation or context. This is the part where I will try to highlight top level things and then again provide access to these slides for you to kind of digest and tease through some of these concepts. So the DMP tool is something that you have access to through JMU. It's a publicly accessible tool, but the JMU one provides you things like JMU specific guidance, and then any DMP that you submit will come to me for review. So this is what the homepage looks like. When you go here and you log in, you will be instructed to log in with your institutional email address. This is going to help the system know who you're affiliated with. And then I'll speed through this a little bit because this is our lovely Okta login. Once you get through, this is what your dashboard will look like. This is really going to be your workspace. So this is where all of your plans are going to be stored and created. So I want to walk through some aspects of creating a new plan, but before, I'd like to show you some of the resources that the DMP tool provides you. So before you start writing, it's a good idea to explore what your funder actually expects. From the DMP tool dashboard, if you click on funder requirements, you can use the search bar to browse templates from various funding agencies. So if we were to look through and type in NSF, the system's going to automatically show some of the most used templates, but you can dig deeper depending on your discipline or grant program. And this is going to give you a sense of what you'll need to address in your plan and whether there are any agency-specific terms or structure you should know about. Even though NSF uses a generic template or a lot of DMPs they're sent through or through the generic template, the directorates vary widely in their expectations. So if you're doing one for computer and information science and engineering, that DMP is going to look a lot closer at your plan for sharing code and software. The one for social sciences is going to want you to have strong restricted access workflows. So realistically, before you start writing, you want to check the funding agency guidelines. So across all of them, you'll really see these 5 categories though. The DMP tool gives you prompts and guidance for each, but it's good to see this overview first. And so you'll find links to official NSF documentation embedded in the tool to help you clarify what they expect in each section. And so depending on the discipline, so biology, geology, CISE, that's going to determine if other required sections will appear with appropriate resource links. And you can also view public plans if that's helpful to look at a complete DMP. So this is just an example. So like I said, some of the other DMPs will ask for additional sections. Roles and responsibilities is an additional section you'll see in things like the one for biology incorporates this. And so, as you can see, when you're looking at other public plans, it really can help guide your process of thinking through the information you'll want to include in your own DMP. So you can search for the same template that you're using, and through then you can sort through what topics may be closely aligned to your research topic. However, what I see a lot of, and I want to caution you, is to never copy and paste sections from a public DMP into your own plan. I really want to provide emphasis that you only want to use this as a guide for reference in completing your own plan, because there might be aspects of this specific project that's not applicable to your research project. So we're going to walk through the main parts of this, which is actually creating your plan. So from your dashboard, you can click the Create Plan button to start building your new data management plan. So once you click that, it will take you to this page. You'll see this form where you enter some basic project information to begin your plan. You'll start by selecting your primary funding organization. So this is going to determine what funder template the DMP will automatically generate in for you. So each has that slightly different requirements. So you can choose which version of the plan you'd like to use. So if you select NSF, these are the ones that will come up. And so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm using the generic NSF template, but there are other ones, again, like the NSF one for biology. And depending on the template you select, these questions you see, so what's expanded with the blue bars that you can have a drop down options for, will vary. So again, the biology plan includes sections tailored to that directorate. You might also see additional tabs if the funder requires follow-up plans post-award. So when you start to flesh out some of these project details, once you've selected your plan, this is going to provide or guidance for you to include some of the project details like your project title, the start and end dates, the funder, and so on. Again, the really neat thing about this tool is it really walks you step by step through your process. So the more detail you can include here, the more useful and complete your plan is going to be. Um, on the right-hand side, you can activate guidance for up to 6 organizations. So you can choose your funder guidelines, JMU's guidelines, and others that you might find useful. JMU's guidance, so a part of, again, being within the DMP tool with your JMU credentials, has been tailored specifically for our researchers with links to local policies and services that help you write that strong plan. You can also add collaborators. So this is inviting others under the collaborator tab. And this could give access to colleagues or project partners. So any of your co-PIs you'll want to add as a collaborator. So you can invite anyone with an email address and specify their role in this aspect of the plan. When you add someone, you can choose their contributor role as well. So are they the principal investigator? Are they the data manager, administrator, or other? And you can also assign their access level. Are they a co-owner, an editor, or would you like to give them read-only access? So if you look here, I have added a test collaborator with read-only access. So this allows others to review the plan, contribute where appropriate, and work together on drafting some of those strong answers. So you as the PI doesn't have to take on full responsibility, assuming you have a team. So now we'll walk through kind of the biggest part of the DMP tool, which is actually writing your plan. So once you've done the first two, right? So you see project details, collaborators, you'll move to write plan. So again, this is the NSF generic template. So these are the questions that will pop up. Each is going to have its own text box with a drop down. So if you see here, you have types of data produced, your data and metadata standards, policies for access and sharing, reuse, redistribution, and plans for archiving and preservation. We're going to go step by step through each of these. So if you here, you'll see a closer look at the writing area specifically for types of data. You'll enter your responses directly in this box. What is really helpful and what I really want to point out here is the right panel. It's going to give you guidance from the selected funder in your institution or any other feedback that you added or like an agency you selected for guidance. So JMU guidance might point to specific data services, again, repository options or policies on retention and access. And you can toggle between the guidance for different sources depending on what's most useful. So when you're thinking about describing your research data, you'll want to give a summary of the data you will collect or create, noting its content, coverage, and data type. So is it tabular data, survey data, experimental measures, maybe models and software, potentially audio-visual data, maybe it's physical samples. All of that you want to include in this section. You want to clearly note what formats your data will be in. And yes, this is going to be for each type of data. So is it plain text? So a text file, comma separated value, so a CSV, reference, so like a TIFF file. And then you want to explain why you have chosen certain formats. So think here interoperability. So where using standardized, interchangeable, or open formats ultimately helps ensure the long-term usability of data recommendations for sharing and archiving. So here's a table that really just gives an example of what different data types could look like. And you can feel free to use a table in your DMP. The problem with tables is sometimes it takes up extra space. And depending on how much data you're using or how much information you're providing in your DMP, you might want to be a little more concise to save space so you still are within NSF's two-page limit. Here's an example pulled from a public NSF DMP in the DMP tool that is showing the first section, which is data and materials produced. And that's really why I say looking at other plans can be helpful. Not all the time do you know how describing some of the data in your sets might be most useful for other people to understand. You'll get to see different formats based on what other researchers have done. I think it really, really helps ease you along the process. So I want us to cover metadata, right? Because that's a required aspect of your data management plan. So when you're thinking about sharing or preserving your data, metadata is what makes it reusable to others. So at its most basic definition, it is data about your data. So it's going to help someone else, or again, even future you, because I cannot remember what I did 5 years ago at 2:30 on December 12th. But documentation is really going to help me understand that when it relates to some of my research processes. So this is going to help you understand what your files contain, how they were generated, and how they can be used. Metadata can live in file names, README files, or in structured documentations like a data dictionary. These are some of the main categories of metadata. So descriptive metadata is going to tell you what the data set is. Things like structural metadata is going to tell us how the data fits into the larger project or collection. And administrative metadata manages the logistics. So who has access? Where is it stored? How is it being used or been used? Including this in your DMP ensures your data is well organized and ethically managed. So this is just a quick example from an audio file, but the concept is really going to apply to all data. So some of the tags you see are artist, album, year. This is all metadata describing the audio file. This is going to help us search for, retrieve, or even understand what the file contains. For your research data, the metadata should offer the same clarity for someone trying to make sense of your files. So again, this is a high-level view of what it means to document your data. Really think of this like a detailed user manual. You want to record context, methods, instruments, file formats, and even software versions so someone can understand, replicate, or build on your work. And I know I'm really hammering into some of these. I really just want to provide as much of a foundation that I can for these types of sections that are in your data management plan. Realistically, this level of documentation is going to be what turns some of your raw files into these reusable research assets. So again, this is an example pulled from a public NSF DMP. Within the DMP tool, you can see things listed here are the file formats, metadata standards, and solutions for gaps that are clearly outlined. So if there aren't any metadata standards or why certain file formats are not interchangeable or widely used. So then the next area within this DMP plan is going to be policies for access and sharing. So for this section, you're going to think about ethics and privacy, intellectual property rights, storage and security, and data sharing. So here, NSF is really going to want to see that you'll share your data responsibly and securely. So if we're thinking about ethics and privacy, you want to explain how you'll protect participants through consent and for sharing, anonymization, and controlled access. You'll note any requirements like HIPAA or community expectations, such as those for sensitive populations or indigenous data. When you think about intellectual property, you want to state who owns the data. Are there any restrictions needed to protect proprietary data or any patentable materials? How is this data going to be used for license and reuse? When you're thinking about storage and security, you want to identify where data will be stored and backed up. Who's going to be responsible for that? How sensitive will the data be? And if it's very sensitive, what safeguards will you have using institutional systems or any other relevant standards? And when you think about data sharing, you want to describe where, how, when you're going to share the data, who's going to get access, how are you going to support reuse through open formats, metadata, and persistent identifiers. So this is really going to show NSF that your data will be shared ethically, securely, and in a way that enables reuse. So that's really the recurring theme here. So here's an example, again, from a public DMP provided. And it's just still showcasing how looking at some of these publicly accessible plans can really aid you when you're writing your own DMP. So when it comes to intellectual property and reuse, really think about how the data could be reused. Remember to consider any additional effort required to prepare the data. Decide which data to keep and for how long. And really the part that I think gets mixed up the most in the DMP is you can state that not all data can be, that your data can't be shared. You just have to note why that's the case, and if there are any avenues for research to follow up to get access to that data. Um, so here's a closer look at the next section, which is for reuse, redistribution, and derivatives. So this is where you'll think about when and how research outputs will be made available. There are aspects from this section that are also going to be, or at least make sense that they'll appear in the prior section on sharing and access. That's because these are really analogous, just like the first two sections on data produced and metadata standards will go hand in hand. Uh, your real goal with this is to make sure all of your bases are covered, even if some of your information for metadata appears in your data produced section. Again, the real goal here is to just make sure you've listed out everything. And so here's another example to kind of look through what this section would look like. And then the last section is on archiving and preservation. For this section, you're going to want to share where the data will be deposited. If you do not propose to use an established repository, the data management plan should demonstrate that the data can be curated effectively beyond the lifetime of the grant. JMU is a member institution to Open Science Framework, and I will always recommend this as an appropriate repository to use. You'll also share your preservation strategies where you'll outline the plans for data sharing and preservation. So, how long will the data be retained? Where will it be archived? And will additional resources be needed to prepare data for deposit or meet any charges from data repositories if you're not using a openly available free repository or free access? So again, I just want to provide an example pulled from a public DMP. So after you've written out your plan, there's going to be the next step, which is to add research outputs. So this is where you can describe your project outputs in a more structured and detailed way, more than just that narrative text. So think of this as the structured data version of your plan. This is where you'll leverage controlled vocabularies and persistent identifiers to make your work easier to discover and reuse. So when you select research outputs, this window is going to be what pops up. You'll be prompted to describe the output's type, the title, and a short description. The rest of the information helps others find, understand, and reuse what you've created. This is what it looks like when you select a type. So options here are going to include data sets, softwares, papers, collections, and more. Choosing the correct type helps with discoverability and alignment with the repository requirements. And so here's an example output. So for an RNA sequence gene expression data set, once you fill in the basics, the next step is to select where you'll store or share this output. So this is your repository. But what do we really mean when we say repository? A repository is essentially an online system where you can store and share your research materials. Think of this as a digital home for your scholarly outputs, whether that's your preprints, white papers, conference presentation, data sets. It's not just about storing the final products. Many of these repositories are going to support supplementary materials like research protocols, code, codebook, documentation, and this is to ensure that your work is transparent, reproducible, and accessible to others. Repositories really play a key role in research visibility, preservation, and making sure that your work, again, is discoverable, citable, and available for long-term use after your project is complete. So these are some of the slides that I'm going to gloss over a little bit, but realistically, there are three types of repositories. You have your domain-specific repositories, so that's going to be tailored to your discipline. You'll have your generalist repository, so that's going to accept data from any field. OSF, or Open Science Framework, is a generalist repository. And then you have institutional repositories. So these are things that are managed at your university or research institution. We currently do not have an institutional data repository. We have Scholarly Commons, and that's used for things like white papers, dissertations, theses. But for data, we're always going to recommend that you use OSF. And your choice of repository is also going to depend on your field, your funder, or even your journal. We'll always recommend OSF because it's a great generalist option, but some types of journals are going to have preferred repositories. So it's worth checking that out before you submit your DMP. When thinking through a repository, you're going to want to ask yourself a few questions. What are the funder or journal requirements? What are your data sharing needs? Do you need something with curation services or access controls? And saving your data on hard drives or servers is not preservation. So it's just storage, which is why you'll want to think through some of these things. Um, And then just to provide a little bit of information on OSF, please do follow up at any point if you have any questions. And then we do offer workshops that kind of walks you through how to use OSF. So it is our open source platform designed to help researchers manage their projects from the start to finish. So it's not just for data. It's useful for all disciplines, and it's going to help enhance that transparency, facilitate collaboration, and help with organizing your materials. It's also a repository that meets NIH and NSF's data sharing requirements for a repository. And now I'll segue us back into the plan. So here's what happens when you select to add a repository. You can also use this to search by subject or keyword to kind of filter through your repository type. So this is where you're going to connect your output to where it's going to live long term. You'll also be prompted to select a metadata standard. This is going to ensure your data can be read and interpreted by others, especially across different platforms or disciplines. I won't lie, not everyone utilizes this function. A lot of the time they use what is already outlined in the metadata section, but if you were, you can even use this to write in your metadata section to search for some known standards. Or if your data type doesn't have one, this is where you would indicate that. Because not all fields are going to have dominant metadata schemas yet. I will say I'm consistently seeing fields improve again as there's more of an emphasis on data management and data management plans. Real quick, interoperability, right? It's a word I've been throwing around. This is meaning that your data can talk to other systems. So again, this is mattering for discovery, reuse, and long-term preservation. This is open formats, common vocabularies, and standardized units to help with that, right? So the Panda video goes over um, their data is in a proprietary format that needs a software to understand, and that software no longer exists, and you have to get it on eBay. So it's just not interoperable. And so that's something that you want to think about. And if you have that, if you don't have an option, right? If you have to use a proprietary software that somebody has to pay to do whatever it is you've done in your research, you want to state that in your DMP and you want to provide a reasoning for why that had to happen, right? If you are analyzing microscopic, I don't know, biology specimens and the image software used for that, this very specific software is the only one that can do that. Again, you just want to provide that explanation for why that's the case. And this is going to show some file formats that kind of help promote that long-term access and reuse. So they're widely adopted, non-proprietary, and don't require special softwares to open. When you're in doubt, you want to opt for some of these. And then here's what it looks like when a metadata standard is successfully added to your research output entry. So it's a part of your plan now. And once you've filled everything in, you'll see your research output summary. So you can repeat this process for multiple outputs. Each can have a unique repository format or even access plan. And now we'll walk through finalizing. Once you're satisfied with your plan, you'll head to the Finalize tab. By default, all of the plans are going to be private. If you want to make them visible to collaborators, your institutions, or the public, you'll have to complete at least 50% of the plan and make sure it's not marked as a mock project. You can also register your plan for a DMP ID. So this is a persistent identifier like in DOI, and it's going to connect your plan to your ORCID, data sets, and publications. So this is a great way to demonstrate you followed through on your commitments. And then you can go ahead and download your plan in several formats. So it allows you to do PDF, Word. I'm going to recommend downloading in Word if you want to do any additional editing or to even check that you're within the 2-page limit. You want to use an approved font and at least 1-inch margins around. NSF allows for Times New Roman at 11 or Arial and some other ones at 10 points or larger. And then also really remember, once you've downloaded a version, label it clearly so you know what it is. If you're going to do any editing, versioning is really going to be key. And so the DMP output is excellent, but it can be very dense, especially for funder guidance and text. So for NSF, you um, often need to shorten or tighten or restructure the language, right? Some of the questions that appear as your guiding statements take up more space than you expected. So always export this, as a Word document so you can revise. If you remove the question prompts, just make sure your headings still align clearly with NSF's 5 required components. And then NSF expects you to actually follow your DMP. So if circumstances change, investigators, PIs, you must notify NSF. You can't simply ignore your plan and go on. It's not an afterthought. Access to data sets, underlying publications is required unless restrictions apply. And NSF can request data at any point after your award. Non-compliance here can affect your future funding. So to wrap things up, a data management plan is more than just a requirement. It's really the roadmap for how you'll handle, document, and share your research data responsibly. Really remember that your DMP is a living document. It's not something you write once and you forget about. It's meant to be updated, revised, and used throughout all of your project. And the DMP tool is here to help with that. It has those templates, built-in guidance, and features like sharing, exporting, linking to repositories. It's really designed to help you create a plan that's actionable, shareable, and editable. And don't forget, you can always schedule a consultation with me if you have more questions or you want some of that individualized help. Also, when you submit the DMP for feedback, it will go directly to me and I will provide comments and feedback. If I have a lot of comments or I need a further conversation, I'll usually follow up with an email as well, seeing if you would like to schedule a consultation. So the slides will be available on OSF. I'll send that link to Lauren. This will have some linked resources to library guides we have. Our data management plan one, for instance, has the DMP tool as well as a triage model of how to walk you through using the DMP tool. So yeah.